So, Leslie asked if you've all voted. Have you all voted? I hear there's still time to write in a constitutional monarchy. The day is yet young for that. All right. So, this is the third time I've done this class, and it does keep growing. The first time I did this, there was a small room with 12 people in it, and 7 of them were Leslie's family members. So you do keep growing. I'm glad that this class keeps growing, that entrepreneurship and engineering are alive here at Stanford. When I first started presenting here, I was part of the Cleantech Open. I was running this organization actually for 6 years and volunteered for 2 years before. I am no longer representing Leslie, the Cleantech Open. I'm actually out in the real world doing real things with real companies, and I'm working with a Cleantech Open company that I think has a lot of potential. But before I kind of carry on, I want to give you a small commercial for the world's largest accelerator for cleantech startups. How many of you here have a cleantech type project that you're interested in becoming entrepreneurs of? Yes? I mean, any of you want to take your projects to market? I saw 3 very low hands. All right, so yes.
I have to fix my omission. ICE 911 was invited to be the first nonprofit to participate in the Cleantech Open, and this was several years ago, I think 2013. And we became semifinalists, even though we didn't fit the model at all. And I was telling Rex, but why would
Can you imagine Leslie not fitting a modle? No, you did a great job,
no,
Leslie.
I always conform. And I was telling Rex offline, but why on earth not say it here? This was one of the best things we ever did for our projects. So I am a huge fan of the Cleantech Open, and I'm sorry I didn't mention it.
No. Well, you know, it's great to have that commercial. So as I say, I'm no longer representing the Cleantech Open. I used to run the organization, but I do not anymore. I'm out doing things outside the, if you like, non-profit and academic world, and I'm back into the space of working with real companies who are really trying to solve a real problem. And the irony behind the Cleantech Open is it looks very different from a classic non-profit. Normally, non-profit organizations are there to serve minority groups who have a need for some kind of support. Well, we support a minority, I guess, entrepreneurs, but we support them in an unusual way. The organization supports entrepreneurs who could save the planet as long as they had access to the kind of help that's required to become commercial successes. If any one of you were to find a new way of producing, lecterns or podia for universities, it would be a terrific thing if you succeeded, but it wouldn't be a huge train smash if you failed. And of course, entrepreneurship makes us all very humble because there's a very high propensity to fail in entrepreneurship, and in cleantech entrepreneurship, an even greater propensity, which is why the Cleantech Open's founders started this model, and the model was that we need to find a way to provide commercial success, to build traction for companies that could make a big difference. And how do we do that? Well, we deconstructed, if you like, the process of entrepreneurship. And much of what I'm going to talk about this afternoon, is it's election afternoon, and I've got no idea where I am. But much of what I'm going to talk about this afternoon is to do with what it takes to take an engineering project, if you like, and make it into a commercial success. Okay, so failure. Failure is much more common in entrepreneurship than we'd like. Failure makes us humble. Probably humble is not a word that's even legal in these halls at Stanford. But it makes us very humble, and I am now connected to at least 1,000 companies, and I have to take responsibility for their failures too, all right? Another thing that makes me very humble. But I've learned a few things, and the truth is that the learning process is what teaches us to do things a bit differently from the way we used to. Now, the likes of Steve Blank, Alex Osterwalder, Alec Rees have, if you like, uncovered a new way of thinking about entrepreneurship. Are these names which are meaningful to you guys? Steve Blank is an amazing speaker and a professor here at Cal. Probably another word I can't mention in Stanford. And what he's done is to deconstruct the process and build a methodology around something he calls customer development. Eric Ries has taken agile development and customer development, put them together in something called the lean startup methodology. And I am now in the bizarre position of having taught these things to entrepreneurs for some years and now enacting these things. So I'm being a live entrepreneur with one particular company, which I'm very excited about in the solar space. And if Leslie invites me back next year, I'll tell you what I've learned in that environment as well. And to use the learning that I have built up over the past 10 years or so, I'm going to boil these things down quite quickly into these 3 different areas. It's appropriate that most of the focus on entrepreneurship is put on the first of these. Solve a core problem, a major problem, or meet a need better than the available alternatives, is point number 1. And the reason this is so important is because many entrepreneurs deliver products into the market that they think are terrific. We have this conceit that because we think something's amazing, we believe that other people will buy it. And no product without a market will ever reach that stage I mentioned at the beginning, which is the commercial traction required to make a difference. Commercially successful clean tech products have a chance of solving our biggest challenges. Those products that remain inside the garage because the entrepreneur is too concerned about his or her IP, which is a major problem. There are many phenomenal technologies which never see the light of day because of this concern about someone might steal my thing. And those that never make it commercially have no chance of making a big impact. There are exceptions to every rule. An exception would be you could solve the commercial problem by being a non-profit. Leslie's talked about her experience of doing that. You could solve the commercial problem by selling your technology, quote unquote, to a government. You could find donors, but classically speaking, the things that take off and the products that we believe will make a difference meet the rules of capitalism. They have customers and somebody buys them. So the first thing you need to do is you need to solve a problem, meet a need, maybe that the product is not something which is a true pain point, better than the available alternatives. The second thing is you need to capture your customer's imagination, and the third thing is you need to build trust. Now I put these 3 things up because they're the combination that seals the deal, if you like. It's very hard to sell somebody something if it doesn't meet their requirements, if it doesn't solve their problem, if it's not something that they truly want or truly need. Now, there are, again, exceptions. You can buy small consumer products. But to make a difference, we need to have products that really meet a customer's need. To capture a customer's imagination, also important. And we'll explain a bit more about the imagination process and how we inspire people. And thirdly, developing trust, particularly when it comes to corporations. All right, so the first of these things I'll cover quickly, and as I say, just a few minutes here to talk about what is a huge amount of learning in a small number of minutes. These guys here, Ries and Trout, are a couple of guys who wrote books in the 80s, marketing books. And one of the big lessons from the 22 immutable laws of marketing is that you start, bizarrely, with tactics, and you then move on to strategy. Sounds upside down, right? Because you've all heard that in strategic planning, I think you believe this, the generals, right, build the strategy first. They have a strategic umbrella, and then they build a series of tactics that sit underneath the strategy. And the ground forces and the air cover and the information and misinformation that you produce, the marketing you do in the commercial market, the air cover you provide, the retail, and all the other pieces will fit underneath an umbrella strategy. And the truth is that many companies have started with strategy and moved to tactics and failed. Why do they fail? Because they're not thinking about the number one most important thing, which all of those three things I put up on the screen a moment ago relate to, the customer. We have to, in Steve Blank's terms, get out of the building. We have to find, in Eric Ries's terms, a quick way to pivot if we don't find the customer who's interested in our product. And we have to build, we have to measure, and we have to learn. Build, measure, learn. It's an iterative cycle. The iteration that we talk about normally when working with entrepreneurs is the idea creation, moving through customer validation, then moving into some kind of inspiration, some kind of learning, which then moves us through the cycle again. So getting out of the building, testing little tiny bits of a product, making sure that we don't build, we don't engineer something that nobody wants, is a crucial way of building a business, and quite different from the way that we traditionally thought about building businesses 10, 20 years ago. Okay? There are other things we can do. This is called the business model canvas. This is a way of, if you like, taking a business and breaking it down into bite-sized chunks. And you'll see on here something which is kind of at the heart of this whole thing called the value proposition. The value prop is what's the product or service that we are building and why might it be attractive to a particular customer. And then you'll see over in this top corner over here, you'll see an area called customer segments. Who's the customer who's going to buy this thing? And when we talk about customer segments, we talk about very little tiny pieces of the market, really sub-segments. If we can find a way of owning or dominating a tiny, tiny market, a tiny homogeneous market where the people within it look like each other and they sound like each other and they have the same needs, and we can service all those needs of that group of people, we're far more likely to build a successful company. If we can then find adjacent markets which are similar to the first market, we're far more likely to be successful. Any ideas why? Why is it better to build a product and dominate a small market than to say, everyone's my customer? Because it sounds crazy, right? Why not go after big markets?
Because they're going to spread the word.
Spread the word, absolutely.
We do incremental development, then you don't try to boil the ocean on your product requirements. You target it at one area, and then you can expand it to another area and incrementally expand your product.
Right, so it's an incremental growth strategy, and then I think you had a point.
Because you have to know what you are good at, and if you do too many things, you cannot figure out what you are good at.
Very good. Well, spoken by a true entrepreneur and a true engineer, right? Yes. Any other points? So you can build a successful company when you grow it bit by bit. You can build a successful company when customer number one has similar needs to customer number two, where customer number one can say to customer number two, I bought this thing, it's good, you should take a look. When customer number two then comes to you, it's the same feature set as required by customer number one. A very quick way to kill a company is to have customer number one over here, who's an industrial packager, and customer number two over here, who is a consumer who just normally buys products below $200. How do you service their needs? How do you build a product that they both will enjoy? And then when you get customer number three over here, who's in a different country, with a completely different set of requirements, you find, and one of the fastest ways to failure is, you'll find that the customer service requirements grow exponentially. Now, we're talking, of course, about technology companies in particular. Yes, Leslie?
I think also, and I don't think you've said it yet, you are able to enter the market with the leanest possible entry because you've understood this particular customer well, and as you said, you're incrementally then adding to that, which is probably part of the success, right?
Right. Exactly right. So you can build it. I mean, one of the other core points, which I'll come onto in a bit. No, maybe we'll just cover it now, is something called pivot velocity, which comes out of this also. one of the ways of ensuring success and guarding against failure is to ensure that as you are experiencing things with customers, we're building small products which we test. We're not building the whole product, we're building small products. You may have heard this term, a minimum viable product, which Les is alluding to, the MVP. We're building a small product which we can test, and I can give it to you, and you can say, okay, well, this thing's all right. We didn't make a ton of assumptions. We didn't build a product with 37 features, and you then come to me and say, well, actually, of the 37, only 3 are useful. Right? Huge amount of work. Only 3 are useful to me. We've asked you first. You've said just 3 things useful. We've built the product with 3 features. We've then, because you two are in the same business, you look like each other, we've then produced the same 3-feature product for you. And so we go. Well, you might say, well, I need a 4th feature. But we can build incrementally. Now, if I'm not selling anything at all, or if I'm finding that the business model I'm building, which I'll talk more about before I move on from this slide, if the business model I'm building shows that there are some elements which need changing, we're going to pivot. We might change the value proposition, we might change the segment. We also might change the channel, the methodology we use to find you. We might say, okay, these things are working, but I'm trying to sell direct, and we should really use Apple stores to sell this product to our customers. Or something else. We want to ground ourselves as much as possible in what we know, because that's managing our risk, and we might change 1 or more attributes of this business model as we go on. Now, if you are running your company on fumes, if you are selling something each month but not enough to cover your costs, you have something called runway, and your runway is limited, right? Your runway is going to be limited by, well, a couple of things. The first thing is the amount of money you have left, but more importantly, it's going to be limited by the number of experiments that you can conduct. And so Eric Ries tells us that pivot velocity is crucially important, because actually it doesn't matter how many months you have. What really matters is how many experiments you can conduct. If you have a hypothesis about who your customer is, or what your channel is, or what your revenue model is, how you'll make money, or what your cost structure is going to be, if you have guesses or hypotheses about those things, and you can rapidly iterate such that you can reach the stage that you've turned a loss-making company into a profitable company, or a loss-making company into one which is convincing enough to get Nancy to give you some more money. Nancy will tell you about the process of investing in companies in a moment. If you can convince an investor in some way, not only that you've discovered a way to sell 1 or a couple of products every now and again, but you've understood the market, you understand your market's needs, you solve a real pain point, you found something which solves their top 3, 4, or 5 needs, that you found a group of them that look like each other, that we found another market which looks like the first market, you're going to be much more interesting. Well, Nancy will tell us if I'm right on that. You're much more likely to be interesting to a venture capitalist. So you've extended your runway. Okay. So another attribute of this process of finding out needs and experimenting and checking to see whether our customers really need our product, or if it's a nice to have, is a number of customer visits. And you'll see here that one of the core ways of ensuring that you avoid failure, enhance your chances of success, is to visit a lot of potential customers. I mean, a lot of them. And in an 8-week period, we would classically say, see if you can get to 100 different potential customers. By the way, it'll vary. All these things do vary. Someone who's got a relatively low ticket value consumer item is bound to be having a larger number of conversations than someone selling a nuclear submarine. But nevertheless, we're talking about a large number of interactions. And you'll see that as you go on, you move from a single data point to a stage where you know more than many of your customers, or many of your prospective customers, about the market you're operating in. Engineering and entrepreneurship really come together. It's really about being scientific in building your company rather than just guessing at who might buy your product and why they might buy it and how you might get to them. All right, so I'm moving rather swiftly through this. But second point I made to you is, and this is an area which people focus on considerably less than the first point. The first one has almost become law in terms of how you build an early stage company. The second point I'm going to make is a little bit more subtle. Has anyone here heard of Simon Sinek? If you haven't, please write his name down and go watch the TED Talk. Because Simon Sinek does a talk explaining why it is that you are more likely to buy product A versus product B. And a lot of it is to do with something very special, which is you need to lead with why. You need to lead with why. I'm going to give another analogy, because that one's not going to be clear to you at all yet, which is 4 words. 4 words. Make America great again. You know those 4 words, right? I think the Trump campaign absolutely outmarketed the Clinton campaign, which is probably a controversial thing to say. And by the way, I'm not going to talk about my politics, but I will just say, in terms of pure marketing, when on the Clinton side we had a situation in which there was discipline, there was policy, there were actual facts about what we might do. On the other side, what do we have? We had some amazing marketing. And if Trump ever stood a chance of becoming elected today, it's because of those 4 words. It's because of the inspiration and aspiration that goes with it. Capturing your customer's imagination is incredibly important, even in an industrial procurement environment. If you are somebody who's in the industrial procurement department of a large corporation, you're not just going to order Leslie's new Flurble Herbal undergrunging device from her because somewhere she's announced this thing. You don't have her catalog. You've got the big company's catalog that you normally buy the undergrunging devices from. You've got their products. So if you are somebody entering a market anew, you need to capture your customer's imagination. You need to stand out. And it's an incredibly tough thing to do, but effectively, this word movement is what comes in here. You need to build a movement, particularly for consumer products, but even, as I say, for those ones that appear in large corporations. You have no real advantage as a small company over the big guys, except nimbleness and your ability to do some of these things here. Now, this could be enough of a reason to capture your customer's imagination. This could be enough, all by itself. But it may not be. And what do I mean by this? What I mean by this is that people often bring products to market in the clean tech space where they believe that the fact that it's cleaner or greener is the reason to buy. And sometimes it is. Sometimes, even in major corporations, the fact that it's cleaner or greener is the reason to buy. There are procurement departments in many big companies nowadays that have a requirement that a certain proportion of the products that they purchase, or indeed all the products they purchase, have to go through some kind of sustainability criteria, and they have to match those criteria. And you stand yourself in very good stead if your product is cleaner or greener than the alternatives. Some consumers will buy products because it's cleaner or greener than the alternatives, but it's not always the case. So the message comes back to, again, it's a hypothesis, you need to test it, you need to find out, and you need to make sure that your customers really believe and understand that the movement that you believe in is one that they believe in. That the inspiration that you're trying to create is one that appeals to your market. Your selling propositions are relevant to them. And you know all the rest of these things that are happening on the planet. I mean, I won't run through them, but the fact that the planet is facing a real challenge is incredibly important to many of us. But never assume that just because it's important to you, that it's important to the people who might buy your products. It's also worth mentioning from a macro perspective that the fact that these things are going on, the fact that the regulatory environment is getting tougher in the US, the fact that Europe and China cares about these things, the fact that the UN is now driving the agenda can be another reason for new technologies to be adopted in our space. All right. So the final thing I want to talk about is developing trust. And again, this is not an area that receives a lot of attention in our space. So there's lots of talk about the need to get out of the building. There's lots of talk about the need to make sure that your customer will buy a minimally viable product and need to break it down and to find markets that you can dominate. Point one is a very heavily worked space. Point two is a more subtle one, only understood by people who really get what it means to launch a product into a market. Point number three is equally crucial. And the irony about point number three is that it's so completely forgotten in early stage companies that it becomes a thing that more often than not kills them. Because companies go out and they interview their potential customers, and there's my phone that I should have turned off, Leslie. Yes, I am. But number three is incredibly important. And it's incredibly important because people will not buy from me or from Leslie or from Nancy or from you unless they feel comfortable doing so. It's an obvious point, but it's a completely forgotten one. Unless they feel comfortable doing so. Now, this is particularly true of major corporations. It's particularly true of corporations who are in the business of changing their list of suppliers. And what happens when a new startup comes along and says, I've got a better mousetrap, and the corporation says, okay, well, let's put you through our sustainability criteria. Yes, great, you're cleaner, you're greener, we like that. What happens when they say, we need to see your balance sheet? What happens when they say, how many customers do you have that look like us? How many Fortune 100 corporations have you sold to in the past? What's the data that you have that proves... How much longer do I have, by the way? I'm going to overrun. I think you should possibly wrap up. I'll wrap up fast. What's the data that you have that proves that the claims you're making are valid? In the clean tech world, it's more often than not the case that we're doing things in a newer, better, cleaner way, which are, by definition, different from the way they're done. And it's more often the case that the markets that they're selling to are going to have some level of concern about trust. In the United States, for example, it is very common that a construction company isn't going to take in new construction material. Whose fault is it going to be if this construction material from which I've now built this new, cleaner, greener construction material fails in 10 years' time and you've gone bust? Who's going to take the blame 25 years from now when these engines we've supplied no longer work because the biofuel that you're producing doesn't work? So corporate customers is particularly relevant too. But it's also relevant to consumers. Early stage companies find it hard to sell to consumers when a product comes into market which captures the imagination, which meets their needs, but they don't trust. So what's needed? Well, we need to have methodologies for developing that trust. You've heard of a company called IKEA. I remember the first time I went into IKEA, and they had the snazzy kind of blue and yellow branding and the big warehouse, but they had something else as well. They had a machine in the corner which was simulating opening and closing this flimsy-looking, cheap but attractive door on this cabinet 10,000 times a month, so they could say, we have data that shows that this flimsy-looking cabinet is going to stand up to your children, whether the truth is there or not. I've got to tell you, my kids have destroyed most of the IKEA cabinets that we've bought in our house within months. But nevertheless, the data was there, so the trust was developed along with the rest of it. Okay, so entrepreneurship, clean tech entrepreneurship, they are much of a muchness. There's nothing I particularly have to go into in great detail in terms of clean tech entrepreneurship. This is very much a kind of primer in the beginnings of this, and I hope it's useful. I'm going to hand over to Nancy right now. Nancy will talk about the other side of this, which is the view from the investor. Don't forget to vote for the Queen.
It's great to be back at Leslie's class and to see you all. I just got a election report, not on the top of the ticket, but a super important battle in Florida, the third largest state. We just won, the solar industry. There was a utility-sponsored ballot initiative that was sort of, looked like it was pro-solar, but it was actually anti-solar, and it was kind of just very misleading, and it was all set to win, and I just read that it had to get 60% of the vote, and I just read that it got like 51%, and that was a very last-minute, really Herculean effort. Al Gore went down there. Anyway, it's makes me very happy, and hopefully bodes well for the rest of the night. Yeah.
He's hoping.
All right, so it's great to be here again, and I think I have too many slides, so I'll just kind of jam through, but please ask questions at any time and tell me when it's 20 minutes and I'll just stop.
Okay.
Oh, there we go, 5:13.
And then we will have time for panel questions.
Yeah. So DBL Partners, my firm, we spun out of JP Morgan in 2008, and I had been a traditional venture capitalist for many years. We are, and started our first impact fund as part of JP Morgan in 2002. Our second fund we raised when we spun out in 2008, and then, we just raised our third fund, which is a $400 million venture fund for impact and sustainability last year, and that makes it the largest such fund in the country. So we're very grateful to have been able to raise that and work with companies like Tesla and Solar City and Revolution Foods and Pandora and Nextracker. I mean, we just have a really great list of entrepreneurs. And what we do is we prove that you don't have to sacrifice social return for financial return or vice versa. We believe the two are inherently connected. And so over the past 11 or so years, we've been developing the proof points to show people that you can do both. And so the field is growing incredibly fast and becoming super popular, so much so. I know I went to Stanford, so I, of course, have a loyalty to Stanford, but I was really happy about something that happened in September in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Harvard Business School wrote a case study on DBL and the notion of double bottom line investing. And it was actually Michael Porter's group, who's kind of the famous competitive theory professor that did it. So that was a real thrill. And now, hopefully, people will learn about impact investing across the country and at various business schools that use the case method. So we're on our way. We're really just trying to move forward and build a better case with more and more companies to show people that there is no sacrifice and get more people to do what we do in terms of blending the two returns. We all know that we confront very, very serious problems relating to sustainability. That's kind of the bad news. The good news is that we can do something about it. And I'm going to just focus on three sectors today. We could talk about the others. But three sectors, electricity, transportation, and ag, represent 60% or more of greenhouse gases. And so the good news is that there's huge markets here, and we can use innovation to disrupt the incumbents. And they do need disrupting. Let me just show you some of the brands here. If you think about GM, PG&E, Monsanto, John Deere. These are pretty, I mean, they're iconic for sure, but they're iconic in some ways, not so much for a track record of innovation, every 2 or 3 years like Apple does, but really because they've been around a long time. Some of these are even founded in the 19th century, not even the early part of the 20th century. So we clearly need to liven things up a bit and get some iconic 21st century names in there to develop products for 21st century needs, not those needs of the 19th or 20th century. And so that's really what venture capital is all about. So during sort of the latter part of the 20th century, look what happened in computers and telecom. And we've all lived through this. We've gone from the mainframe to mini computers to PCs to the cloud telecom, your grandmother has that, had that landline, wireless landline, cell phones to smartphones. And our lives have been improved by this. I mean, sometimes when we're addicted to our phones, I think that maybe we haven't been improved so much. But in general, I think we would all agree that life is better for these innovations, and the downward cost of all of these products, the fact that many people can afford to have an iPhone. And in fact, through policy, starting next month, all low-income folks that get food stamps in this country will get an iPhone. So this is something that's ubiquitous. So what we feel is that finally, after 100 years, it's time for these sectors to kind of take a look at the playbook that we've seen in other sectors and start to innovate. And we are seeing that. You can see that we're moving from centralized fossil to microgrids and distributed renewables. Obviously, automobiles were making that change, started by Prius and now into full electric and eventually autonomous drive electric. And in agriculture, we're moving from that mechanical and the green revolution phase to more data-driven agriculture, precision agriculture as it's called. Also moving much more into low chemical inputs, more organic and sustainable agriculture. And what's happening along the way is that these sectors are really adopting many of the same themes of innovation as the computer and the IT sectors. They are different in their own way, and we'll talk about that, but these are some of the most dominant investment themes of our age. Personalization, transparency, cost reduction. This is really what drives venture investing across all sectors and has resulted in some really great returns. Now it's coming to a neighborhood near us in the sustainability sector, and that's very, very good news. So let's just take a few minutes to talk about those three sectors. What do we feel the future looks like in these industries? And I'll talk about sort of the technology pull and the demand, technology push rather, and the demand pull. So in automobiles, we really think there's a mobility trifecta, and that it's electric. We're going to electrify transportation across the board over the next decades. There's ride sharing and there's autonomous drive. This notion that transportation as a service as opposed to as some asset that sits in your driveway unused for many hours a day. And what's driving this is cheaper, less hassled. Many folks don't really want to own a car, especially in the city any longer. It's greener and it's safer. The data are coming out that autonomous drive is safer. So this really just blows apart what we think of as the automobile industry, and look at the comparison of the incumbents, sort of the 20th century. When I do this, I'm not diminishing the importance of the incumbents in the 20th century. Obviously, they were huge and they continue to play a huge role, but they're not alone anymore. That's my point, is that these companies here, these are just as important to the future of sustainable transportation as our incumbents are. When you look at agriculture, again, this is a little earlier. We're not, anytime you get a Tesla that the whole world knows about, that raises the level of knowledge. We're not quite there with ag, but some good trends. On the technology side, big data and analytics, the ability to have farmers get information that helps them make better decisions in terms of inputs, watering, energy use, that's all doable, and the good news is that it's cheap. Automation, the ability to use robotics and also go indoors for agriculture, lots of good savings there. The availability of biotech and nanotechnology to help on the product side. And on the demand side, you've got cheaper, greener, more choice, and more farmer independence. We're really seeing all the intermediaries that have existed in agriculture begin to be displaced, and they add cost every time that you take your grain from the farm to the silo to the distributor to the miller to the end user. I mean, there's just margin lost across that whole channel, and that's why we have such a problem with farmers staying on their lands. Well, I think you'll see that start to turn around as farmers become more empowered. What are some of the and so we talked about John Deere and Monsanto, of course, some of the big names there. These are some of the names that we are looking at. Some of these are investments already. Planet is a company that makes microsatellites, satellites about this big, that enable you to cheaply get daily or weekly images of land, and that helps you understand what's going on. And agriculture is a big application for this new technology of cheap, frequent images, because it can help you identify crop health issues and such. Blue River is making automated farm equipment that helps with computer vision and robotics, just helps bring down that cost. Labor is one of the highest costs on a farm, so when you can outsource some of that to a robot or use computers to make decisions, that will improve the margins of farmers. Appeal Sciences is a producer of a sort of a wash made out of plants and with water that basically covers plants. This is a food waste opportunity, covers the plants so that they don't rot as fast. And so you're able to keep avocados, on the shelf for weeks instead of, a day, instead of days. Or you're able to export, if you're in Africa, mangoes that you could only sell to southern, if you were in Kenya, you could only sell as far north as, say, Italy, because they would rot otherwise if you went further north. Now you can have a bigger export market for your fruit just by a non-toxic, non-GMO, FDA-approved wash. Really interesting company in Santa Barbara. And then Farmers Business Network, this is a company we were the seed investor in with Kleiner Perkins. This is a cheap member service, $500 a year for farmers to crowdsource your data that you collect on your tractors and that they've been collecting for decades, but they never really got their own access to the information. And so lo and behold, now they can crowdsource, see where they benchmark in a county. Are they in the 10th percentile or the 90th percentile in terms of their yields, in terms of their costs, in terms of how many pesticides they use, how much water they use, and then get ideas for how to, if you're low, how to get higher ranked and change your practices and save money. And also in the process of doing this, I mentioned how you're able to get rid of some of the intermediaries. The process of aggregating this information, and it's all anonymous, you begin to see, wow, people are paying vastly different prices for, say, corn seeds within the same county. There's no transparency historically, and now with big data that you sign on to for $500 a year, you all of a sudden know that you're paying a third as much as your neighbor is, and so Farmers Business Network is able to identify that problem and then just sell you the seeds directly at that lower price. So lots of ways to monetize the value and also improve the margins of farmers, which will be necessary if we are to feed, the ever-growing world that we live in. But just to show you how these are the points that Farmers Business Network has. I think they have about 12 million acres so far. They're only about 2 years old. And they will give you the seeding rates. They'll give you the crop intensity, what's growing where. It's just a very easy and easy to access information that farmers use iPads to receive.
And
then,
are all these companies in your portfolio?
all but the Blue River one.
Okay.
Yeah. So the future of energy, of course, we believe it relies on the electrification of transportation, which we already covered. But it's no good to electrify vehicles if we don't green the grid. I mean, no one's going to be super excited 10 years from now to have all these electric cars if we're still running our grid on coal. So we need distributed renewables. We need storage. Bringing that to the party makes a huge difference. Microgrids, the ability to pull your power from the rooftop solar or the grid or the storage in your garage based on price signals and based on grid strength. That's really coming sooner than you think, and that makes every building really its own virtual power plant, and you can save a lot of energy and develop clean energy and also save money in this, which is going to be very appealing. And then demand response, you layer that on, say you have all these ways to control where your power is coming from, and then you layer on, well, when it's 100 degrees out and everyone's got their air conditioners on and you're not supposed to use the grid as a result, so you're drawing off of your solar panels, why not, just automatically reduce your air conditioning for the period of the day that you're not really in the house or whatever. So that's all. We've seen demand response Gen 1, but we're moving into Gen 2 with demand response connected to storage and solar, much more powerful that way. And of course, this is all driven by the need for cheaper, greener, more choice. Consumer choice is a huge driver. We don't want to just be told what our electricity is by our utility anymore. I mean, some people do, which is fine, but a growing number don't. More reliability and more functionality, like I just described to you, that scenario is going to be very powerful. I'm just going to skip through the next few slides. This is the infamous or famous, depending on your point of view, duck curve, where if we have so much solar during the on a grid during the middle of the day, we have no real load, and then when everyone goes home and turns on their lights when the sun goes down, we have this amazingly high load. And so this is something that utilities and policymakers, really focus on and need to fix. Well, it's fixable with solar and storage and renewables and microgrids. You can really, that blue line, instead of having all this choppiness, you can smooth your load by introducing these technologies. So that's a huge plus. You're seeing a lot of storage projects going in, utility scale, both in terms of number of installations and number of megawatts. There are going to be iconic companies that really learn how to connect the distributed assets, that is everyone's rooftop with solar, and turn that into a generation asset. We have a company called Advanced Microgrid Solutions that is developing these virtual power plants I was telling you about. Already has 90 megawatts of contracts with SoCal Edison, and has just signed a deal with Invesco, a huge real estate conglomerate back east. These are kind of the names you're going to be hearing a lot more about going forward. And then finally on energy, this is a deal that we did in Africa. There are 1.3 billion people on this planet that don't even have electricity, and half of those are in sub-Saharan Africa. And so they use kerosene lamps, which are both unhealthy and bad for the planet. And so for about the same price, in these rural areas, you're able to have a small panel and a small battery and very efficient lamps and TVs and bring electricity to these homes for the first time at about the same price that you pay for kerosene, and also be able to pay with your mobile phone and have a loan product so you don't have to buy it all at once. This is happening. This company, Off-Grid Electric, which has some people here in San Francisco, most people in Tanzania, and now other countries like Rwanda and West Africa. There are hundreds of thousands of homes that have already been converted, and this is just the beginning. This is kind of one of the highest impacts you can have, I believe, is to prevent a centralized fossil-based grid from being built in areas that are grid-free right now, and at the same time allow families to move into the middle class by giving them light and affordable clean energy. This is one of the benefits of my job. I mean, there's all kinds of risks and problems we face on a daily basis. But because this is so important, when you do important things, you get to go to pretty high-level meetings. And while we're all focused on the election today, and we've been very involved in a lot of policies here in our country and in our state, this is of interest to the Pope. And so on Saturday, I'm actually going to the Vatican to talk about this company and the off-grid opportunity with Cardinal Turkson and the Pope, Pope Francis.
How exciting. You get to visit with the Pope on Sunday?
One of the days. It's Sunday. It starts Sunday night, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. He's going to be there with us for half a day. I know. I know. Like all those times when we have headaches, and we worry about all of our companies. This kind of is one of the fun things you get to do. This is just more visuals on their products and such. So really what's happening is that when we started in the 2000s, there wasn't that much to invest in. You know, we had Powerlight and Tesla and Solar City. But the good news today is that there's so much to invest in, and Rex was really helpful in kind of helping you understand how to position what you're doing and really focus on narrowing your opportunities so as to increase the chances of success. But by the same token, we have to diversify if financial investors need diversification, and now we just have an abundance of things to invest in. So I think I'm going to stop there. I have a whole policy thing, but we can get into that in the Q&A. So thank you very much. Do you want us to sit here?
Come to the fun part where we go ahead and ask some questions. So I'll take the end one here, and we'll ask. We've got about 15 minutes until we're formally done. And I think you have to run right away, so we'd better be really fast about this. First, I guess before I go to the written-in questions, is there a single burning question there that just has to be asked? I see, right away. Yes.
So it was about your breakdown of energy, transportation, agriculture. The energy and the transportation, I agreed with. I think that's a lot of what people are thinking. I was really surprised in your agriculture. When I think about agriculture and climate change, I think about issues around resilience, yields, irrigation issues, and water accessibility. And I didn't see that as any of the pull factors in your...
Yeah, no, it's there. It's just that it's very hard to make money in a company that's just doing one input. Because that's not how farmers work. They work with all inputs. And so, and usually they use too much of everything. That's kind of a gross generalization, but if you really look at what's happening, they plant too many seeds, they use too much fertilizer, they use too much pesticides, they use too much water. And so the data is kind of the Trojan horse. It's once you get in the door and you show farmers what they're doing and how they could improve, then they begin to kind of deconstruct and allow farmers to use less of everything. And so that's how you get, because you're measuring it. You can't really make a compelling case for a farmer until you've measured and shown them that they're overwatering or they're growing a crop in an area that really isn't suited for it and they should switch to something else. So it's organic, we do a lot of food investing, and organic is a big part of our investment thesis. We have an organic cold-pressed juice appliance company that totally is driven by organic agriculture. But if you look at the numbers, the real carbon is produced in row crops and in mega farms. And so if all you do is at the edges work with the organic farmers, you're not going to move the needle. You need to do both.
I guess just one of the simplest ones, and I think you've answered it, but I want to make sure we get it all milked out. What are some of the key success factors you look for in a clean tech startup? So let's say you're sitting out here with a phenomenal idea. What?
Well, I think Rex really covered a lot of that in terms of the focus and and defining your market. You know, I think we look at it's really the same as other startups, although we will look at regulatory trends, and we don't ding you because you have a regulatory issue, because that kind of goes with the territory. But if we don't feel we can make any progress in terms of making sure regulatory themes are consistent with business success, then that's something that we would have trouble with. So what we look for is tenacity and nimbleness, as you say, and the ability to move regulations, move markets, displace incumbents. It really has to do with the team and the experience. I mean, obviously we want a defensible IP position. We want big markets that are willing to change, but that kind of is any deal. But I would say in clean tech deals, you really do need people that are willing to take on huge incumbents and know how to do it in a sophisticated way, and also move regulations as well.
So you're going into two of my own questions.
So but do you mind
Yes,
if I jump
please.
in?
Yeah.
So it could be kind of interesting to test this with you, Nancy. So in the Cleantech, at least in on my watch, what we did to try and boil down much of what you said, because I think you covered it all, is we would say the 3 T's: team, technology, traction. Mm-hmm. And actually, we converted the 3rd T into market, because most of the companies that we work with are very early stage and have no traction. So traction potential or the market. So, but in that order, more or less. And much of what I spoke about today was to do with the market side and the market definition and the domination of the market and penetration of the market. So, but the interesting thing is that in talking to a lot of venture capitalists, the number one thing that we always get back is, let's start with the team, because if the technology is mediocre but the team's great, the team will figure it out. If they haven't got much traction but the team's great, then they'll figure it out. So interesting to get your perspective.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously you'd always like to have an A on both the team and the product, but in some ways I'd rather have an A- team and a B- product than vice versa.
Right.
Because you can't always pivot, and not always. I mean, sometimes you just won't succeed. But with a nimble, strong team, you can take something that isn't perfect and turn it into something that will be viable.
Yeah.
So my own list of what I was wondering if you guys would pick between, and I think we've heard it, is I had, so what's most important to you? Technology, team, commitment, IP, market fit, collaborations, other. I'm hearing team.
Yeah, because the team kind of results in all of those other things coming into place.
And you would.
Yeah, and it's worth just mentioning, I think I said it, but there's a huge focus, particularly I think in people who are kind of arriving in Silicon Valley, to be very protective of the IP and to make sure that they don't tell anyone about what they've got this thing, and to be into stealth mode forever. And of course, there's value in being in stealth mode for some period of time, but it's probably an overpreciousness. Many of the companies that succeed because they're open, because they get lots of advice from lots of good people, because they use Silicon Valley, they use the resources that are out there, they use people like Nancy, they go and they talk to venture capitalists. And frankly, if your IP is so thin that by describing it to somebody, they could just steal the whole thing, you probably haven't got a company anyway.
There you go. Another one that you touched on was, so here's my question related to it. What's the relative importance of policy and entrepreneurial technology in addressing climate change? And what's important about how policy and technical arenas interact?
It's it's essential. I mean, I have sort of another trifecta in addition to the mobility trifecta, which is it takes innovation or technology, it takes policy, and it takes capital. I mean, that's kind of the world that we live in and that we navigate through, and that entrepreneurs do as well. And so it's not that and policy is not static. I mean, and the results I just showed you or told you about in Florida, no one would have predicted that 6 months ago. So it's not like you can get it right and then just check off that box. It has to be part of your DNA. You have to, and like Lyndon Rive, the CEO of Solar City, I mean, he didn't believe how many people he had to hire very early on in that company to deal with all of the different states' environmental and
Oh, wow.
net metering laws. And I did, I said, wow, we have so many government affairs people, and which is unusual. That's not something that you hire in a startup company. But in this industry, especially in the solar and the wind industries, it's very, very important. So, you can use trade associations and all of that, but when it comes down to it, in uncharted territory, which is what this is, the leading market players will set the policy dialogue.
It's very interesting what you're saying, that we're living in this world where startups have to get involved in policy in the way that, but I mean, we have many, many instances of this kind of thing. And it just occurs to me, one of them is one of the founders of the Cleantech Open actually was involved in an electric bus company. You may know the company.
Proterra.
Indeed. So a lot of Mark's work was about going to Congress, seeing if there were if there were means to get governments to the stations to get the demand pull from municipalities. So a lot of that, but also a lot of it was to do with the fact that, when you are putting a big draw on the grid in the middle of the day to recharge an electric bus, the cost of so doing it, just because of the way that the tariffs work, the more you use, the cost doesn't go up by a small amount. It certainly doesn't go up, in a linear fashion with the amount you're using. You have an exponential leap in the amount you have to pay for energy. So he had to go to the Public Utilities Commission, the PUC, here in California, and actually talk about the issue that we could never have electric buses. You could never have that replacement take place if there weren't some way of changing those tariffs. It's a bizarre thing for a startup to have to take on, but as you say, the leading companies then change the regulatory environment for everybody.
Yeah, that's wild. What are your thoughts on Bill Gates' Breakthrough Energy Coalition? Will it really bring breakthrough technologies to the forefront of the clean tech revolution, or will there really be a huge financial gap between innovation and funding bringing it to scale?
Well, I feel we need it all. While I am not in a position to invest in things that are going to take 20 or 30 years to come to fruition, if mega family offices want to do that, I say more power to them. My feeling is that he's going to do both. I mean, not that I'm directly involved, but what I've heard is that they're going to, go for some real long odds kinds of investments, but also do some that are nearer term. And so I do think it's important to make sure that we have a healthy ecosystem that creates companies that can help now as opposed to 10 years from now. Yep. Having said that, it's a free country. If people want to do both, I think that's great.
And there's another program called, the criteria for the coalition are those announced also at the Paris summit, which is Mission Innovation. There's another program which launched in the UK called the Apollo Global Program. And they're all very similar to each other. Apollo Global wants to get countries devoting 0.02% of their GDP, I think it is, to solving these big problems. They all have a place. I mean, we talked today about the need for commercial traction. If you have a product which is not interesting to a particular market, then you have a problem. But on the other hand, if you can find a source of funding which is non-commercial, then other things can happen. So one of the cool things here we have in the US is ARPA-E, the Advanced Research Projects Agency for energy. And what they do is they fund the kinds of things that Nancy probably wouldn't fund. They're going to
take... Or they come in, or I come in right after them.
Or you come in after them because they've taken the technology risk out, and then we're now moving into a phase where it comes back to the team and other things as well. I think every year in the Cleantech Open, I used to look at 5 to 10 really kind of wild, way out there companies that had something which, if they could raise 10 or 15 or 20 or sometimes more $1 million, then the technology could change the planet. But who was going to ever find that 10 or 15 or $50 million? Well, now there are ways of those things happening, and then they can enter the mainstream venture capital and capital markets funding mechanisms.
How patient?
The only thing I would say is that we shouldn't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, right? Because we do have a time clock ticking, and we can't take another 100 years to figure this out. So we need to make sure we support the solar panels and the wind and the electric cars that we have today, and make sure they proliferate as we then reinvest for next-gen functionality.
That's another angle on how patient does capital have to be in the clean tech space? It's like perhaps some patience, but very urgent, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, we do have a sense of urgency. On the other hand, venture as an asset class is, most funds are 10 years, and so you do have more, you're not investing in stocks that, you have to unload on a weekly basis. So that's the good news. So, I think that it really, you have an investment period in a fund for the first 3 to 5 years, and then you have kind of use years 4 through 9 to kind of start harvesting everything, and then you've always got some laggards, and kind of you work those out over a longer period of time. So, I mean, that's the model of our business, and it's not always perfect, but it works pretty well. The family offices that don't answer to their, are their own investors. So, I mean, I have tons of investors that I need to answer to, and I need, I've got a pension fund. I'm not going to, I need to make money for those investors. So, but if you're a family office, you have more freedom. You have a longer time frame if you want, and so you're able to kind of play on the edges a little more.
I think it's just worth mentioning how special DBL is. I mean, Nancy and her team have done an amazing job finding a space which is not really quite flavor of the month anymore. I mean, although these things go in waves, there were a lot of venture capital firms in that kind of 2005, 2006 era, including some very big name VC firms that you've all heard of, who are no longer investing in this space. And Nancy, by investing in the likes of SolarCity and Tesla and so forth, has done an extraordinary job of picking some great winners. It's also worth mentioning that they've done a great job because they're managing to get returns in the traditional venture capital sense. I was on a panel with another VC saying, if you look at our return on capital, the capital deployed and then the returns we've got over time, it's been great. The problem is that VC funds typically have this kind of time-limited period that they need to get their return on capital within a much shorter space than, say, 20 years. So the IRR, the internal rate of return, is the measure by which they're judged, and it's pretty rare for a VC firm in this space investing in agriculture and the like to manage to make those kind of returns. So they're very special at DBL. Well done.
Thank you.
There you go.
Thanks.
And in fact, there were some questions on the double bottom line. Do all of your investors believe in that every single time?
Yes, on a certain level. I'd say some are passionate about it, and some are, as long as I make money, I'm good with the double bottom line. So, I mean, but that's good because we bring people in and they learn more about it. And then there are people that are just passionate and they help build the field. So I think it's really important to have a diversity of investors and to be able to, it makes our job, we have to please everyone. And so it's not enough just to, have a mission. You have to back that up with the results that allow you then to scale. We wouldn't have a $400 million fund if we weren't being responsive to the people that want to make money and make a difference.
Fantastic. I saw an urgent question back there.
Yeah, so kind of pulling together the last question and a few things from the presentation, Nancy, I really enjoyed the framing of, the VC model has been applied to the technology in software, et cetera, and we've had all these incredible companies, and now we're applying it to these new fields, these the three ones you brought up. But I'm struck by the difference between a software or an app and a energy, transportation, and agriculture is capital intensity. And so as this we've kind of started talking, there's this time problem, and I just add another way to look at that same dimension is you just need a lot of money. And so to play the devil's advocate a little bit, is VC as an asset class large enough? Are their fund sizes large enough, given the need for portfolio diversification, to really handle clean tech, or should we be looking elsewhere to different financing models?
Well, you can solve the problem of capital intensity by the way you manage your portfolio. If we had had all Teslas in our first fund, even though it turned out to be a grand slam and then some. We couldn't, we were a $75 million fund. There's no way we could have had, 12 companies in the portfolio that needed as much cash as Tesla did. So you make sure you invest in companies. You have a mix, some that don't require. We had a smart meter software company that we sold to Siemens. So, that didn't require as much money. When you win in capital-intensive investments, you make a huge amount because they are, by definition, they're very significant companies. So you don't need to have a whole portfolio of them. And so a lot of what we're trying to do is balance and make sure that we're capturing the opportunity, but not overextending ourselves. And then the second thing you do is you get syndicates where you're not writing the only check. You're in there with other groups that are in for the first and second and third round, and however many it takes before you sell the company or it goes public. And so that's a way to mitigate the risk, is to have strong, deep-pocketed investors. Like in the farm company that we did, Farmers Business Network, Kleiner and DBL in the beginning, and then Google Ventures came in, and then we just did a round with the Campbell Soup venture arm. So these are all great groups that add lots of value, but they also, they're in for the long haul, and they have the deep pockets to help through those periods of growth.
And so to add to that, the fact is that the venture capital model is relevant for a number of reasons. One of them is that you have the big brains and the access to diligence and the kinds of things that can lead around where cash may come in. And Nancy just mentioned one strategic investor, Campbell Soup, or another major deep-pocketed investor that may be coming in for different reasons than IRR, which has a time frame attached to it. They may be coming in for a whole series of different reasons because they have a strategic reason to invest. It's also worth mentioning that there are other forms of capital that come in when a venture capitalist is involved. For example, when you've got something you can kick, you might be able to get debt financing because there's an asset that you can use as collateral. It's not always the case because a lot of inventory, particularly when it's experimental, has no real value, and the banks don't want to put their money behind something which has no value. If the company were to fail, look at Solyndra. When they failed, those tubes weren't actually worth anything. But nevertheless, there are plenty of things that you buy, particularly when it comes to buying robots or buying raw materials or buying equipment for manufacturing that have a value outside the company itself, and they can be financed separately.
Any other burning questions out here? Yes.
I was wondering about DBL's investment. Energy, but one company sold it out, and that was Pandora. I was wondering why.
We're having trouble hearing you.
We got this thing going up, and you're very quiet.
Try to yell.
Sorry, if I stand up. I was wondering a little about the portfolio of DBL, and that your companies tend to be all energy and climate based. However, there's one that stood out, and that case was Pandora. I was wondering how DBL decided to invest in Pandora and how that fed the double bottom line initiative.
Yeah, we're not all sustainability. You're asking about kind of what do we decide to invest in. We have a core commitment to sustainability, and so maybe 60%. But we also invested in Pandora. We invested in the Muse, which is a career building site for millennials that's really taking off. We're in the Real, which is a online luxury consignment site headquartered up in San Francisco that's also doing extremely well. So the reason we do that is for financial returns, to diversify. And when solar was in the tank, digital music was not, and then when digital music was in the tank, solar was not. So that worked out well. But we also want to prove that impact lives in any company. And while it's obvious why Tesla has social impact or Solar City, it isn't as obvious for Pandora. And so what we do in those companies is we work to bring out a social impact. And in the case of Pandora, we had a whole community engagement program with them where they taught music. They still do, in a low-income school where there was no music budget, and the employees, many musicians obviously, work at Pandora. They loved interacting with kids who didn't have any music courses, in the schools. They learned a lot about how kids relate to music. So it was kind of a win-win. That gave them more local political capital. So in those early days when they had to fight the record industry for the right for the right royalty structure, they were able to ask the mayor of Oakland, to help them connect with a congressman that actually helped write the Digital Music Copyright Act. And that mayor, he didn't know anything about digital music. He was not a Pandora listener, but he had heard about how Pandora taught music at one of his schools. And he said, wow, you guys are giving back, and what can I do to help you? So a lot of times you build political or community capital by engaging with a broader set of stakeholders. And while it doesn't always work, those kinds of stories we tell there are many of them, where you kind of did something just to kind of do the right thing, and then it ended up helping you. In fact, the CEO of Pandora at the time said, I never realized when we've taught music down by the Oakland Coliseum, that would help us on Capitol Hill. And so that's kind of a good soundbite for impact. And so that's why we do it because we love entrepreneurs of all stripes, and we want diversification, but we also want to show people, maybe you don't like electric cars, maybe you don't want to go work at Tesla, maybe you're really a musician and you want to have impact. We do that to show you that you can have impact even though what you're doing isn't obviously impact.
With what it takes to take an engineering project, if you like, and make it into a commercial success. Okay, so failure. Failure is much more common in entrepreneurship than we'd like. Failure makes us humble. Probably humble is not a word that's even legal in these halls at Stanford. But it makes us very humble, and I am now connected to at least 1,000 companies, and they have to take responsibility for their failures too, all right? Another thing that makes me very humble. But I've learned a few things, and the truth is that the learning process is what teaches us to do things a bit differently from the way we used to. Now, the likes of Steve Blank, Alex Osterwalder, Alec Rees have, if you like, uncovered a new way of thinking about entrepreneurship. Are these names which are meaningful to you guys? Steve Blank is an amazing speaker and a professor here at Cal. Probably another word I can't mention in Stanford. And what he's done is to deconstruct the process and build a methodology around something he calls customer development. Eric Rees has taken agile development and customer development, put them together in something called the lean startup methodology. And I am now in the bizarre position of having taught these things to entrepreneurs for some years and now enacting these things. So I'm being a live entrepreneur with one particular company, which I'm very excited about in the solar space. And if Leslie invites me back next year, I'll tell you what I've learned in that environment as well. And to use the So, Leslie asked if you've all voted. Have you all voted? I hear there's still time to write in a constitutional monarchy. The day is yet young for that. All right. So, this is the third time I've done this class, and it does keep growing. The first time I did this, there was a small room with 12 people in it, and 7 of them were Leslie's family members. So you do keep growing. I'm glad that this class keeps growing, that entrepreneurship and engineering are alive here at Stanford. When I first started presenting here, I was part of the Cleantech Open. I was running this organization actually for 6 years and volunteered for 2 years before. I am no longer representing, Leslie, the Cleantech Open. I'm actually out in the real world doing real things with real companies, and I'm working with a Cleantech Open company that I think has a lot of potential. But before I kind of carry on, I want to give you a small commercial for the world's largest accelerator for cleantech startups. How many of you here have a cleantech type project that you're interested in becoming entrepreneurs of? Yes? I mean, any of you want to take your projects to market? I saw 3 very low hands. All right, so yes.
I have to fix my omission. ICE 911 was invited to be the first nonprofit to participate in the Cleantech Open, and this was several years ago, I think 2013. And we became semifinalists, even though we didn't fit the model at all. And I was telling Rex, but why would I
Can you
tell
imagine
him?
Leslie not fitting a model? No. Something which is a true pain point, better than the available alternatives. The second thing is you need to capture your customer's imagination, and the third thing is you need to build trust. Now, I put these 3 things up because they're the combination that seals the deal, if you like. It's very hard to sell somebody something if it doesn't meet their requirements, if it doesn't solve their problem, if it's not something that they truly want or truly need. Now, there are, again, exceptions. You can buy small consumer products. But to make a difference, we need to have products that really meet a customer's need. To capture a customer's imagination, also important. And we'll explain a bit more about the imagination process and how we inspire people. And thirdly, developing trust, particularly when it comes to corporations. All right, so the first of these things I'll cover quickly, and as I say, just a few minutes here to talk about what is a huge amount of learning in a small number of minutes. These guys here, Rees and Trout, are a couple of guys who wrote books in the 80s, marketing books. And one of the big lessons from the 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing is that you start, bizarrely, with tactics, and you then move on to strategy. Sounds upside down, right? Because you've all heard that in strategic planning, I think you believe this, the generals, right, build the strategy first. They have a strategic umbrella, and then they build a series of tactics that sit underneath the strategy. And the ground forces and the air cover and the information and misinformation that you produce, the marketing you do in the commercial market, the air cover you did a great job.
No,
Leslie,
I always conform. And I was telling Rex offline, but why on earth not say it here? This was one of the best things we ever did for our projects. So I am a huge fan of the Cleantech Open, and I'm sorry I didn't mention it.
No. Well, it's great to have that commercial. So as I say, I'm no longer representing the Cleantech Open. I used to run the organization, but I do not anymore. I'm out doing things outside the, if you like, non-profit and academic world. And I'm back into the space of working with real companies who are really trying to solve a real problem. And the irony behind the Cleantech Open is it looks very different from a classic non-profit. Normally, non-profit organizations are there to serve minority groups who have a need for some kind of support. Well, we support a minority, I guess, entrepreneurs, but we support them in an unusual way. The organization supports entrepreneurs who could save the planet as long as they had access to the kind of help that's required to become commercial successes. If any one of you were to find a new way of producing, lecterns or podia for universities, it would be a terrific thing if you succeeded, but it wouldn't be a huge train smash if you failed. And of course, entrepreneurship makes us all very humble because there's a very high propensity to fail in entrepreneurship. And in cleantech entrepreneurship, an even greater propensity, which is why the Cleantech Open's founders started this model. And the model was that we need to find a way to provide commercial success, to build traction for companies that could make a big difference. And how do we do that? Well, we deconstructed, if you like, the process of entrepreneurship. And much of what I'm going to talk about this afternoon, is, it's election afternoon and I've got no idea where I am, but much of what I'm going to talk about this afternoon is to do learning that I have built up over the past 10 years or so. I'm going to boil these things down quite quickly into these 3 different areas. it's appropriate that most of the focus on entrepreneurship is put on the first of these. Solve it should say a core problem, a major problem, or meet a need better than the available alternatives, is point number one. And the reason this is so important is because many entrepreneurs deliver products into the market that they think are terrific. We have this conceit that because we think something's amazing, we believe that other people will buy it. And no product without a market will ever reach that stage I mentioned at the beginning, which is the commercial traction required to make a difference. Commercially successful clean tech products have a chance of solving our biggest challenges. Those products that remain inside the garage because the entrepreneur is too concerned about his or her IP, which is a major problem. There are many phenomenal technologies which never see the light of day because of this concern about someone might steal my thing. And those that never make it commercially have no chance of making a big impact. There are exceptions to every rule. An exception would be you could solve the commercial problem by being a non-profit. Leslie's talked about her experience of doing that. You could solve the commercial problem by selling your technology, quote unquote, to a government. You could find donors, but classically speaking, the things that take off and the products that we believe will make a difference meet the rules of capitalism. They have customers and somebody buys them. So the first thing you need to do is you need to solve a problem, meet a need. Maybe that the product is not